Welcome to the Explainer. Now, if you're getting ready for the UPSC exams, you know that the constitutional history of India is absolutely essential. Today, we're digging into a law that, on the surface, might just look like a simple business license renewal for a company, the Charter Act of 1793. But trust me, this act was so much more than that. It was really the moment the British grip on India tightened, creating the administrative and financial blueprint for the Raj that would last for over 100 years.
But before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the act itself, we've got to set the scene. This law didn't just appear out of nowhere. So to really get why it was so important, we have to ask ourselves, what was the problem it was trying to fix in the first place?
And the root of the problem? Well, it all goes back to the Pitt's India Act of 1784. This act set up what they called a dual control system. So you had the Board of Control in London handling all the political and military stuff, and then you had the company's court of directors managing the business side of things. Now, on paper, that sounds pretty neat, right? A clear separation of powers. But in reality, it was a mess. It was basically a recipe for gridlock, creating constant confusion, infighting, and critically, nobody was really accountable. The system was broken, and it was practically begging for a major overhaul.
Okay, so let's get into it. Here's our game plan for breaking down the Charter Act of 1793. We're going to look at why it was such a big deal, how it concentrated power, the incredible reforms it brought in, the financial system it created, a very shady loophole, and finally, what it all meant in the long run.
So, what was the main objective here? Well, to put it simply, the Charter Act of 1793 was all about consolidating power. It was designed to get rid of that confusing dual control system, make it crystal clear who is in charge of what, and ultimately just tighten the British grip over their ever-growing territories in India.
So let's start with the big picture. What did the act do about the East India Company's business rights and, maybe more importantly, the whole power structure of its leadership in India?
First things first, on the business side of things, it was pretty much business as usual. The act gave the company's exclusive trading rights in the East another 20-year lease on life. This meant no other British companies could legally get in on the action.
But the real game changer wasn't about commerce, it was about governance. The act made veto power a formal, official thing for the Governor General. Now, this power wasn't totally new. It had been given as a kind of special privilege to Lord Cornwallis way back in 1786. But here's the crucial difference. The 1793 Act made this incredible power a permanent, standard feature of the job itself.
And this changed everything. Before, the Governor General could actually be outvoted by his own council. But after this act, the process became way simpler. The council could debate and vote all they wanted, but at the end of the day, the Governor General held the ultimate trump card. He had the final, legally backed say to just override their decision.
The impact of this was just huge. This move, along with giving the Governor General more control over the Bombay and Madras presidencies, really shifted all the power to one single point. This is the moment the Governor General goes from being something like a chairman of the board to being more like a viceroy, an almost king-like figure ruling on behalf of the crown.
Okay, so power was locked down at the very top. But the Act's reforms went way deeper than that, bringing in a foundational change that completely reshaped how the civil administration and the justice system worked on the ground.
Now, this was arguably the Act's single most important administrative reform, because it dealt with a massive conflict of interest. Think about it. Before this, the district collector was both the taxman and the judge. They collected your taxes, and they presided over the courts, the Mal Adalats, that handled disputes about those very same taxes. The Act completely blew up that system. It separated the judiciary from the executive. From now on, you had revenue officers to collect taxes, and all the legal fights went to regular civil courts, the Diwani Adalats. This was a huge step toward creating an impartial, rule-based system.
The Act also brought in some other key changes to make the administration more professional and to tighten London's control. Big jobs like governors and the commander-in-chief now needed the king's seal of approval. The commander-in-chief was no longer automatically on the council, which helped ensure a more civilian-led government. And to try and stop corruption, senior officials couldn't just decide to pack their bags and go home. If they left India without permission, it was treated as if they had resigned.
All right, let's talk about the money. This is a super important topic, especially for the mains exam, because this act created a formal system for draining wealth from India to Britain that would have consequences for more than 100 years.
First up, the act was great news for the company's investors back in Britain. It actually required that the dividends for shareholders be increased by 10%. And where did that money come from? Straight from the revenues collected in India.
And if that wasn't enough, the company now had to pay a massive sum,
£500,000 every single year to the British government. And again, the source of that money was the Indian treasury.
So, here's the really critical takeaway. This act formalized what became known as home charges. And what that means is that Indian revenues were used to pay for the entire British administrative setup in London. We're talking salaries for the Board of Control, all of it. Basically, India was forced to pay for the very administration that was ruling it from thousands of miles away. And this practice went on all the way until 1919.
But, maybe one of the most controversial and long-lasting consequences of this act was how it accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, created the perfect conditions for the infamous opium trade with China.
It's a real puzzle, isn't it? The East India Company had a total monopoly on trade. So how on earth did one of the biggest and most destructive drug trades in history start up and boom, right under its nose?
Well, the answer is a very, very clever loophole. See, the act let the company give out licenses for something called country trade, which was basically private trade. The company itself never officially touched opium, but it gave out these licenses to its own employees and to private merchants. These guys then shipped enormous amounts of opium from Bengal and Bihar to China. This created this perfect situation where Britain made a fortune, but the government could wash its hands of it and say, oh, that's just private individuals doing business, it's not us.
So let's pull all these threads together. For your exam prep, what's the bottom line here? What was the lasting legacy of the Charter Act of 1793 on the subcontinent?
The Charter Act of 1793 was, without a doubt, a major turning point. It turned the Governor-General into a nearly all-powerful figure. It cemented that separation of powers that's so key to modern administration. It made the economic drain through home charges and official policy, and, tragically, it paved the way for the opium trade. It really did lay down the blueprint for a more centralized, more authoritarian, and more financially extractive British Raj.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. I mean, yes, the act brought in some really important administrative reforms that look good on paper, but you have to ask yourself, what was the real goal? Was it truly about creating a more efficient and fair system of government, or was it about building a more efficient machine for economic exploitation that would define the next century of British rule? That's a question worth pondering.